In my last video, we talked about choosing the right kayak, especially for those of us who are a little bit older in years, and it becomes really important we get the right equipment. If you missed that video, there's a link to it up above. But today I want to go one step further, because once you've picked out your kayak, the next obvious step is that you need, what I'm holding in my hand, you need a paddle. Now, paddles are far more important than what most people think, especially when they're starting out. We'll spend a great deal of time and care choosing the kayak, and then the paddle's almost an afterthought. We just grab a cheap one off the shelf to get us going. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but choosing the wrong paddle can be a big mistake, particularly as we are starting out, and particularly as we are getting older, it becomes more of an issue. You can have the perfect kayak, but if you've got the wrong paddle, a great day on the water can suddenly change into a really hard, terrible day on the water, and it all comes down to your choice of a paddle. I probably don't need to tell you this, but paddling is a repetitive action. You're sitting in a kayak, you're holding your hands out, and you are continually doing something like what I'm doing now. It's a repetitive action. Now, any repetitive action is going to take a toll on your shoulders, your wrists, because you're holding the paddle with your wrists, and also your energy levels. Now, these issues are all elevated. They become more important as we get older because we're more prone to repetitive stress, we're more prone to shoulder injury, and we're prone to trouble with our wrists. So it's important that we get the right paddle. Now, paddles, like anything in the kayaking realm, can get quite technical, but today I just want to keep it fairly simple and talk about three aspects of the paddle. And the first is the blade up here, and then what we call the shaft, the pole, if you like, between the two blades. And the other is the length and the weight of the paddle. Now, I want to touch on each of these quite briefly. When we come, first of all, to look at the blade, you'll notice that blades can vary quite considerably. For instance, if you looked at these two blades here and compared them, you would notice that the black one is a longer, thinner paddle, and the red one is a shorter, wider paddle. Now, that's going to make a real difference, because what's going to happen when you put each of these in the water, the red one is going to catch much more water than the black one does, simply because it's wider. This means that when you pull back on the paddle, you're pulling back more water than what you would with a narrow paddle. This, of course, is going to affect things like your speed and your power. If you want more speed and more power, you'll go for a wider paddle. But if you're wanting to have an easier paddle and last longer on the day, you might go for a narrower paddle. So for me, when I think about paddles, I first of all think about how long am I planning to be on the water for. Most of my paddling is on longer trips where I'm on the water for several hours a day, and I quite often go paddling for days on end where I'm camping. And it's a long, repetitive day with lots of paddling. I would want to have a narrower, longer paddle because it's going to be easier to paddle. I'm going to last longer. If I took something like this, I might go a bit faster for a while, but I'm going to clag out and I'm going to get really tired long before I would paddling with this one. So this one might be for a more relaxed paddle, a longer paddle. It's generally, I think, for older people, a better option to go for the longer, narrower paddle than what it is a wider paddle. The next thing you're going to notice about paddles is that some of them are longer than others. Paddles can vary from somewhere around about the 2 metre size up to about 230. You do get shorter and longer paddles than that, but most of them come in that range. So what's the difference, and how long should your paddle be? The length of paddle you need really comes down to three different factors. First of all, how tall are you? The taller you are, the longer paddle you might need. Secondly, you need to consider the width of your kayak. Many of the recreational style kayaks and the inflatable kayaks are quite wide, and therefore you might want a longer paddle. The narrower the kayak, then the shorter the paddle that you're going to need. And the third factor is, how high do you sit in the kayak? In some kayaks, you're sitting up quite high on some sort of elevated seat and you might need a longer paddle. But if you're sitting down lower in the boat, you might need a shorter paddle. So how tall are you? How wide is your kayak? And how high are you sitting in the boat? All determine the length of the paddle. Now, if your paddle is too long, if I take a very long paddle like this one here, if the paddle's way out there somewhere, if you can see that, and I'm paddling with it and it's a bit long, what's going to happen is I'm going to have to reach out further with that paddle, and when it enters the water, it's going to be further from the kayak. This is going to create an element of turn in each stroke. So your kayak is more likely to zigzag if your paddle is too long. But if your paddle is too short and you're paddling very close to the kayak, and what's going to happen there is that you're going to have to work a lot harder because you've got to get that paddle down into the water and back here, and then this end is just here somewhere, and then you've got to get that one down. And so you're doing this sort of more accelerated action because your paddle's too short, and that's going to make your paddle very uncomfortable. So you've got to determine the right length for you. Many paddles these days come in two pieces and they will click together like that. And when you put them together, they slide into each other and you can lock it in position where you want it. And the advantage of this is, of course, that you can make it longer or you can make it shorter. Now, why might you want to do that? Maybe you've got more than one kayak like I have, and you've got some really wide kayaks, but then you've got a narrow kayak. Or maybe you're in a situation where more than one person in the family is going to be using that paddle and they need to adjust it for their height. So there are some real advantages to a paddle that comes apart and alters in length. So the cheaper paddles, of course, like this one here, this is a really cheap paddle. It's got no adjustment on it at all. You cannot alter the length, and it's a lot more limited. The other advantage of being able to unclick your paddle is that you can turn the angle of the blades. Now, I like my blades straight. In other words, on the same angle at both ends. Some people go the opposite and they would go on a 45-degree pattern, something like that. Other people go somewhere in the middle. Now, it's personal taste. Because I've paddled the one way all of my paddling life, I naturally paddle with a flat blade on both sides. Other people like it feathered, as I said. But if you've got a paddle that comes apart like this, you're going to be able to change that as you go and to experiment with different angles. And that's probably a good thing to do. Now, the third thing that we need to talk about with paddles is weight. Paddles weigh quite different from each other. This paddle here is a cheap $20 paddle, and this paddle here is a paddle worth about $500. The biggest difference between the two is weight. This one would easily have 2 or 3 times more weight than this paddle here. This paddle here has an aluminium shaft and a plastic blade. It has no adjustment on it at all. It's locked in. You cannot take it apart at all. Whereas this one, you can take it apart and you can adjust it every which way, and it is incredibly light. Now, weight is determined by what the paddle is made out of. The cheaper paddles are generally made, like this one here, aluminium and plastic. And if you buy a kayak and it comes with a paddle, I've found that even if you buy a really decent kayak, quite often the paddle that they're going to give you with it is something like that, aluminium and plastic. Now, the advantage of these, of course, is that they're cheap, but you are holding a aluminium blade. It's a smooth surface, so you don't have any sort of palm grip on it. Aluminium is also gets hot in the sun and cold when it's cold, so you're subject to hot and cold. And the plastic blades, they're more durable, like a plastic kayak would be, but they are quite heavy. Now, that may not affect you if you're going out for half an hour, but if you're going out for 5 or 6 hours, the weight of the paddle makes a huge difference. This one here is a fiberglass paddle. The whole paddle, the shaft and the blades are made out of fiberglass. Fiberglass is a lot lighter than aluminium and plastic. I'll come a bit closer. It has a textured surface on the shaft, which is a bit more pleasant for your arms to hold. So a fiberglass is a good middle of the range paddle. If you want to go high end, you come back to this one I was showing you a moment ago. This paddle is entirely carbon. So it is incredibly light. It almost weighs nothing in your hands. It's a beautiful paddle. The blades glide beautifully through the water. It sits really well in your hands, and it has a lovely texture to hold. It's just a great paddle. Now, these, of course, are quite expensive. These are the high-end paddles. This one's $500, but of course you can pay a lot more than $500 for a paddle. So what should you do starting out? I would suggest that you at least go for a fiberglass paddle. A plastic paddle is cheap up front, but it's going to be awkward to hold. It's very likely going to give you shoulder strain and wrist problems and sap your energy much faster than a good paddle. Look, this is a mistake that I made when I started paddling. I didn't realize how important the choice of paddle was, and I just grabbed any paddle that I could find and thought I was good to go. It wasn't until I bought my first good paddle, my first fiberglass paddle, I bought that, and I thought, wow, this is a huge difference. And then when I got the carbon fiber paddle, I thought this is just another level again. And the choice of paddle makes a really big difference. So think about that. If I was a senior starting out, I would at least go for a fiberglass paddle, and one that can be altered in length and the feathering angle, as I talked about, and you can experiment with that. You can experiment to get the length right. You can experiment to get the angle of the blades, the feathering they call it, and it just has so many advantages. If you're going on longer trips, like I often do, if I'm going away on a multi-day trip, I always pack a spare paddle in the kayak because it's just a safety issue. If I'm just going out for a day and the water's fairly quiet and I'm fairly confident, I would just take the one paddle. So to sum up, when choosing a paddle, look at the weight of the paddle. Now, when you're testing the weight of a paddle, don't just hold it up like that, because they all feel pretty much the same when you hold it like that. When you're testing the weight of a paddle, always hold it in the paddling position like that, and it gives you a far better idea of what that paddle feels like. So look, don't just choose your paddle on the basis of price alone. Think about some of the factors I've talked about today. This is just a basic introductory talk to talk about the different types of paddles and the pros and cons, but it's important that you get the right paddle. So put some time and thought into this and enjoy your time on the water. In my next video, I'm going to talk about life jackets or personal flotation devices, because that's the third aspect of what you need when you go out in a kayak. But look, just get out there on the water. It's a fantastic thing to do. If you missed my video where I talked about why older people really need to get a kayak and get out on the water, I'll leave a link to it up there. But look, just enjoy the water, get yourself a good paddle, get yourself a good kayak, set yourself up for days of comfort and pleasure on the water. You'll never look back. It's the best thing you could do. There's nothing quite like being on the water. So look, thanks for watching today. God bless you, and I will see you on the next video when we'll talk about PDFs, life jackets. Bye for now.